Corruption is the rule of the day in the post-Vatican II church. If you read honest histories of the post-Vatican II era, you'll see that regardless of whomever the Pope is at the time, the rule is institutional corruption. We're talking here about the earthly element, not the mystical body of Christ. And the Vatican Bank has been at the center of all this corruption all too often. And here it is again today. Against this is the news that the good bishops and cardinals are themselves starting to prepare for the conclave that most people seem to think is coming in the next few months, regardless of whatever rosy good news is coming out of the Vatican these days. And I've got a video for you later today about how their rosy good news doesn't actually make a lot of sense. So tune in for that if you are interested in all the rosy good news about Francis and how it's mixed messaging at best. But if a conclave does come to pass, I'll be here to cover it for you in real time. But until then, let's start here. The Vatican, as you know, is very, very, very good at virtue signaling to its secular paymasters. We have a tone death example of this here. So we go here to Michael Haynes posting on X. Just in. Vatican will turn off lights on St. Peter's Basilica tomorrow, meaning today, to mark World Wildlife Fund's Earth Hour. Yeah. Holy See has done this on a number of occasions to raise awareness of respect for our Mother Earth. I'm going to remind you of something that G.K. Chesterton once said. He said, "The earth is not our mother, it is our sister in creation. We are to care for it, but we're not to worship it." You can be a good steward without engaging in this kind of neo-pagan nonsense that the Vatican itself is pushing. If you've read Laudato Si or Laudate Deum, its sequel, when I cover that one here, they go far, too far on that issue. And this invocation of Mother Earth is a perfect example of this. But it's the Vatican's priorities right now. They are prioritized on that publicly. There's something else going on here today. So the main story today shows the lie that Francis's biggest supporters tend to tell, that he has somehow cleaned up Vatican City, and he's cleaned up the Vatican Bank and made things more transparent. Here, the issue we're going to talk about here is one familiar to Americans right now. A judge in Vatican City is doing everything in his power to protect the system from scrutiny and from being cleaned up. That should sound familiar to you. It sounds just like American politics right now. So we go here to the Pillar Catholic for this story, this incredible headline that I never thought I'd see brazen to do, but here we are. And the headline is Vatican Court, auditor cannot bring immoral and indecent evidence at appeal. Here they're saying that you can't use evidence in an appeal that went against you because the evidence would tarnish the image of Vatican officials. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. I would hope nothing like that would happen anywhere in the secular world, but they're going out of their way to protect Vatican officials in the Vatican Bank and the financial system. And this is going to sound very familiar to you. It's from the article. Judges told the Vatican's former Auditor General that his termination lawsuit cannot move forward unless his lawyers exclude from their case evidence that judges consider immoral and indecent, including evidence of alleged financial misconduct that could harm the good name of high-ranking Vatican officials. The directive came from Vatican City judges considering whether to admit former Vatican Auditor Libero Melone's appeal against the 2024 rejection of his wrongful termination lawsuit. Melone, who says he was forced out of his auditing job in 2017 for being too, is due back in court on the appeal this May. One of his attorneys has resigned from the case because of the Vatican Court's unusual ruling. In a decision issued October of last year, judges told Melone's lawyers that their lawsuit appeal could not include or present swaths of evidence in their appeal on the grounds that it would harm the good name of curial officials and departments. Court documents obtained by the Pillar show that the October order was litigated during a November 2024 hearing and then affirmed by judges in January, who ruled that Melone's arguments harm the public interest by attributing immoral behavior to Vatican officials. In the general and repeated attribution to persons holding top positions in the Roman Curia of practices that are at least immoral and certainly indecent, such as those outlined in the appeal document, the court believes that there is a public interest in intervening, the judges decided in an order signed January 8th. What they're saying here is they don't deny the facts. They're saying you can't use the facts because it could harm the names of the people who did the bad thing that could harm their name. Wrap your head around that one, folks. But Maloney's legal team has argued that the offensive evidence forms a basis for their appeal, which show that Maloney and his team uncovered widespread financial irregularities and malpractice in the Vatican, which they argue led to his forced departure from office. Sources close to the case told Pillar this week that in response to the court order, one of Maloney's lead attorneys, Romano Vaccaetta, resigned from the case last November, calling it unheard of for judges to dictate the arguments and evidence which can be used in an appeal before hearing them in full. The January 8th ruling from the Vatican City Court of Appeal acknowledged that Maloney's lawyers had challenged the legal validity of the October order, which was issued in response to concerns raised by the Vatican City Office of the Promoter of Justice. But they concluded that the Promoter of Justice had a legal right to flag matters of public interest, including the prospect of damage to officials' reputations and interests. Because the proposed evidence related to officials and departments from whom Maloney is not directly seeking damages, the judges decided evidence concerning them could not be presented. The request for compliance by the appellant parties does not include those persons who are directly or indirectly defendants in this proceeding, and the handling of the request does not therefore require attributing to them facts that are extraneous to the case. Read the ruling. End quote. Now, you can imagine what the response to this has been. I could show you, I'm not going to today, but I could show you a whole lot of tweets from people showing that these are news commentators, bloggers, Catholic bloggers who tend to be fairly moderate in how they talk about things, completely flabbergasted at this. Legal experts flabbergasted because this is nakedly protecting corrupt individuals from having the consequences of their actions brought to light. If a reputation is destroyed because somebody does something evil and somebody else brings it to light, usually, at least in my mind, it's not on the person who brought it to light that's the issue. It's the person who did the deed. That's the issue. Now, that's a bit different than past sins of a person being dug up and flung against them when they've clearly moved on and repented of things. That's different. You're trying to destroy their reputation. But here we're talking about things where people harmed the church, at least the institutional church. They tried to. You remember, we're talking here about the Vatican Bank. Later on in the article, Angelo Becciu, the cardinal who was essentially the fall guy for all of this, his name came up, but if you've heard me talk about this before, this will be familiar to you. Archbishop Vigano was an auditor basically himself. He was put in charge of digging up Vatican finances and seeing what was going on. And he was so good at his job, finding millions upon millions of euros hidden away in places off the books, that Benedict XVI had to send him to the United States to be papal nuncio to protect him. That's how good he was at his job. He was eventually succeeded in that office, by the way, by Cardinal Pell, okay, who found millions upon millions of euros in places it should not have been. And then the Vatican's corrupt system struck back at him when mysterious wire transfers to Australia were discovered that immediately were followed by him being charged with nonsensical McCarrick type offenses, which it took the Supreme Court of Australia to point out that not only were the things they said about him literally impossible to have happened, but that he had been railroaded in a corrupt judicial case. Nobody knows where that money, by the way, for Australia went. You can take your guesses if you want to think about where they went. I'd bet they went to help skid the wheels of that decision. And then, of course, Cardinal Pell would go and have some surgery done in the Italian hospital system, which is one not known to have a good reputation anyway, and his body was reported to have had some very weird things done to it when he didn't survive the surgery. After Pell, though, was Cardinal Becciu. Cardinal Becciu was apparently went along with the things going on during his auditing and became the fall guy when these things came to light. But a lot of people do also think that Cardinal Becciu is probably getting a bad rap too, to a certain degree. If you want to read a book on this, on the how bad of an idea the Vatican Bank was, and it ties directly to like USAID, Catholic Charities, and all this stuff, because the Vatican Bank has long been whispered to be kind of a financial operation that helps some pretty unsavory figures in Europe. The Vatican Bank was founded immediately after World War II. And if you want a good history of this, Malachi Martin's Vatican, if you can find a copy on Kindle if you have an e-reader. I'll just on Amazon. But I thought it was back in print. It turns out it's not. You can find used copies sometimes for a decent price. Somebody told me in an email yesterday that they found a good copy on eBay for like $30. So if you want to read it, it goes into the crises in the church from technically 1870, but really starting in World War II, in the waning days of World War II, all the way through the 1980s. And the whole book is basically about the Vatican Bank. This has been a problem, in other words, basically since the Vatican Bank was founded. If you want a real reform of the church, find another situation for the church that Holy See to handle its finances other than having its own bank, because it seems to have been the cause of a lot of problems. The temptations there are just too much for some people. Now, while this is happening, though, a shadowy figure is sending messages to the cardinals, letting them know that to save the church from implosion requires the cardinals to give the church a good pope. I've been sitting on this story for a few days because this will give you some hope, and I think this is a good time to talk about this. The SSPX news site published this piece that I'm about to show you here just a few days ago. And this is an article that will sound familiar to people. And its headline is Demos 2 gives the Vatican nightmares. All right, so what's Demos? Because it says Demos 2. Demos was the pen name of officially an unknown cardinal, but all signs say that it was Cardinal Pell. Before he passed away, he wrote a letter under the pen name Demos to the cardinals, outlining all the problems in the Francis papacy, and that the next pope will need to fix these problems. So cardinals, you better give us a pope who could start restoring order in the church. He passed away, and then another letter by someone afterwards was called under the name Demos 2 was published. And the article begins by giving you some background on Demos and then a little bit on how this letter is coming in. But here's the meat of it. Here is what they say is needed to fix the problem. Demos 2 proposes a series of reforms. Demos 2 appeared in 2024 with content in line with the first Demos. Luigi Bisignani outlines its content. In this new text, 7 priorities are outlined for the church in the future pontificate. The author, while recognizing the merits of Pope Francis in his compassion for the poor and marginalized, highlights several critical issues in modus operandi that requires a resolute course correction. It is a sort of manual for the new pope, ready to resolve the problems left by his predecessor. This is where the problem lies. Demos 2 proposes a series of reforms. Here are some of them noted by the Italian journalist. Quote, the first necessity is to restore doctrinal clarity, since confusion has fragmented the church and undermined the confidence in her evangelical mission. It is essential to resolutely reaffirm the fundamental truths of the Catholic faith, avoiding the ambiguities that fuel divisions. Ecclesiastical government must become more collegial, since the current pontificate has adopted an autocratic style, excluding bishops and cardinals from crucial decisions. The new pope must restore collegiality and respect the role of bishops and dioceses. The church is a community of law, but under this pontificate, there has been an excessive use of motu proprio for centralized decisions and a neglect of canonical procedures, particularly in matters of justice, meaning you need to restore due process, both in the promulgation of canonical law, but also in just generally how you operate. The Italian journalist notes that, quote, Demos 2 also addresses the College of Cardinals, which must be stronger and better prepared. He quotes, the current pontificate has diversified the college in terms of geographical origin, but has neglected the theological and pastoral formation of many cardinals, which is a nice way of saying problem cardinals in the College of Cardinals right now, a lot of whom don't know a lick of Latin. You saw this in some of those prayer vigils for Francis. They were singing some classic Catholic hymns that were in Latin, and none of them could do it except for Cardinal Burke, and I believe it was Cardinal Erdo could do it, and that was it. Nobody else could, or maybe it was Arins. But they were the kinds of cardinals you expect to be able to do this, but the rest of them couldn't. That's kind of a problem. It is necessary to be ready to govern the church with rectitude and spiritual and doctrinal maturity. These reflections in the memorandum aim to guide the discussion among cardinals in view of the next conclave, suggesting a necessary reversal of the current management of the Vatican. Demos II is concerned with the doctrinal formation of cardinals, perhaps because he himself is a theologian. Perhaps he has had to exercise responsibilities in a matter of doctrinal rectitude. His references indicate that he situates this doctrinal rectitude in the tradition of Francis's predecessors, John Paul II and Benedict XVI. He supports a hermeneutic of continuity. Could this be from the pen of Cardinal Gerhard Mueller or Cardinal Robert Sarah? I will throw another name in that for you, and that's Monsignor Books, who is not even a cardinal, he's not even a bishop, but he's a priest. I bring his occasionally. He worked in the Roman Curia under Benedict XVI, and this sounds like the kind of thing he might say as well. So it could be any of those three, either Mueller, Seurat, or Demos, or not Demos, but Monsignor Books. Still, as this mysterious author acknowledges, the next conclave will be composed of cardinal electors with little or no theological formation and from such distant geographic origins that it will be difficult, if not impossible, for them to seriously vote for this or that candidate. To overcome this major difficulty, an initiative was taken by two journalists, as reported by Sandro Magister on December 23rd, 2024. And here they're probably alluding here to the College of Cardinals report. I think it's published by Complicit Clergy. I think you can read that. It goes over like the bios of like every single member of the College of Cardinals. There's 138 of them. So I haven't done a video on every one of them because there's 138 of them. Can't really do that. The renowned Vatican expert recalls the situation created by Francis. Certainly, quote, Pope Francis has left intact the rule that assigns to the cardinals the task of electing the future pope, but he has done no little damage to the cardinals' ability to act as a college. The future pope will almost certainly be one of them, and to choose them, the electors need to know each to have regular times of meeting and discussion to operate indeed in collegial form. But this is precisely what Francis broke off in the initial phase of his pontificate. Evidently annoyed by the outcome of the first and last true consistory he convened, when in February 2014 he called the cardinals to consult on the themes of the upcoming synod on the family. Magister cites the facts. At that consistory, held for 2 days behind closed doors, the Pope entrusted the keynote address to Cardinal Walter Casper, an accomplished theologian, who back in the early 1990s was a combative supporter of scrapping the ban on communion for the divorced and remarried. From day one, Casper's address in favor of remarried was contested by a very large number of cardinals, and by the most authoritative ones, to the visible irritation of Francis, who at the next day's opening session tried to start the discussion over, saying that he had reread before going to sleep the address Casper had given, and that more than ever he had found it profound and serene, to the point of making him exclaim with emotion, "This is called doing theology on one's knees." The Vaticanist, that'd be Sandro Magister, adds, in the following months, however, a good dozen prominent cardinals spoke out publicly in various ways in defense of the perennial doctrine and practice against communion for the divorced and remarried. Among them were the Germans Gerhard Ludwig Müller, Walter Brandmüller, the Italians Carlo Cafara, Angelo Scola, Camillo Ruini, the Canadians Mark Ouellet, who has since repented of his position and would become one of Francis's most trusted advisors, and Thomas Collins, the American Raymond L. Burke, and Australian George Pell. Some of these, plus others of great standing, and not only from the conservative camp, were among the signatories in October 2015. The letter of the 13 cardinals to the Pope that contested the framework set for the second session of the Synod on the Family, making Francis even more furious. And it goes on, talking about how a lot of this led to the dubia. And you remember, Cardinal Casper was the guy who gave us Amoris Laetitia. The Communion for the Divorced and Remarried, 2016. Previewed in 2014 at that consistory. Francis, in response to all that, shredded the concept of collegiality, where he would take seriously the input of the bishops and the cardinals present. College of Cardinals, the most trusted of the bishops. That's one of the things that needs to be restored, he says. Now, I'm going to just rather humbly suggest that he kind of hinted at it when he talked about there's a lack of theologically formed cardinals. What you need is a restoration of orthodoxy, little o orthodoxy, meaning the same morality, the same theological teachings, with the same doctrinal clarity as has always been taught in the church until the Second Vatican Council era, when ambiguity took over and kind of let's all get along to go along kind of attitude started happening. That's what you need. Probably not going to get it, but that's what you need. And the issue of those cardinals not being theologically well-formed and collegiality being destroyed was on purpose. It will have profound implications for the next conclave. In the current setup of things, they know two kinds of cardinals themselves. They know the cardinals who are geographically closest to them, maybe if they're from the same country or neighboring countries. And when we're talking about cardinals from the peripheries, what does that mean? That means most of them don't know most of the other cardinals. And the other one is whoever they talk to in Rome. And those are all Bergoglians. Virtually all of them are. We're talking Tobin. Okay. We're talking Fernandez and Hollerich and those kinds of cardinals. And so those cardinals from the peripheries who are not theologically well-formed are probably going to be more comfortable supporting the cardinal they know best, whoever that is, that emerges as one of the candidates. That's not a good position to be in. Now, along with that, we have Bishop Schneider, who gave an interview in German to a LifeSite reporter. And I just show you the interview, but again, it's in German, so we're not going there. But the LifeSite has published this piece here with the headline, Exclusive, Bishop Schneider says next Pope must reaffirm doctrine on marriage, matters of the flesh, and male clergy. Bishop Schneider said the Pope must clarify Catholic teaching in those aspects that have caused the most confusion in recent years, especially morality of the flesh, marriage, and the all-male clergy, and, of course, relativism. It feels like it's been ages since I've mentioned Bishop Schneider on this channel. If I had my way, I'd make him Pope personally, but it seems like it's been forever, but that's because he's largely been quiet. Most of the better bishops and better cardinals have been quiet since they basically excommunicated Vigano and tried to make Cardinal Burke homeless. Once those things came down, most of the good bishops basically shut up, and it's nice to see him back. But he has some concrete recommendations for the next pope. It says Bishop Athanasius Schneider has said the next pope must clarify church doctrine on marriage, matters of the flesh, and the solely male priesthood to combat confusion on these dogmatic issues within the church. In an interview conducted in German with LifeSite News journalist Andre, Bishop Schneider explained what he believes are the main issues the next pope should address. The bishop from Kazakhstan said the pope's main task is, quote, to strengthen the brethren in the faith. This is a divine mandate, one of the first tasks of a pope, and he must carry it out with clarity, not ambiguity, he stated, stressing that the pope must unambiguously declare the doctrine in those aspects that have caused the most confusion in recent decades and, above all, in our time. One of these key issues is the relativism of faith, that supposedly dogmas and faith evolve according to the scheme of Hegel, meaning evolutionism, which is completely against the spirit of Christ and the gospel and the 2,000-year tradition of the church. Furthermore, the Pope should clearly remind us of the principles of morality with regard to the order of the matters of the flesh established by God, which is not at our disposal nor at the disposal of a synod or pope. This order of the flesh and of the sexes is ordained by God, Bishop Schneider stressed. The admission of divorced persons to communion, of course, undermines the indispensability of marriage and undermines the sanctity of the Eucharist, he stated. The next pope must also clearly affirm the teaching that the James Martin types and the acts and lifestyles associated with them are against the divine order, as well as reason and natural law. This also includes so-called blessings for James Martin type couples, Bishop Schneider said. The Pope furthermore needs to reaffirm the uniqueness of Jesus Christ as the Redeemer of mankind, and that Jesus Christ founded by him are the only path to salvation intended by God. He must additionally declare that other religions do not lead to salvation and redemption. This must be clearly stated, doctrinally, by a new pope, the prelate added. Moreover, the subject of the sacrament of ordination must be taught with the greatest authority in the sacrament of ordination in its three stages, the diaconate, the presbyteriate, and the episcopate, meaning deacons, priests, and bishops, that this one sacrament in its three stages is ordained by God, meaning divinely ordained, and that only believers that are men can receive it. He said the theological feminism, which is against the gospel and the 2,000-year-old tradition of the church, must be unambiguously condemned. So I have only mentioned a few points that most distort divine revelation today, and that is what I think a new pope should do first, Bishop Schneider concluded. That's all well and good. And it does get to the heart of the orthodoxy question. What he's essentially asking for a next pope is the one that I think you're least likely to get, which is one who will truly fix the church. You're either going to get a Bergoglian, which will continue the birth of the ape of the church, or you're going to get a moderate who will do nothing to stop things and may even continue with the work of building the ape of the church. They'll just slow it down a little bit. Because a moderate type pope isn't really going to want to ruffle feathers. It's kind of in their DNA. And the good test for the next pope is how quickly do they get rid of Cardinal Fernandez? If they don't get rid of Cardinal Fernandez, it doesn't matter what else they're doing. It doesn't, because it shows you what it is they're really up to. But that's Bishop Schneider giving you what he thinks a next pope should do. And you combine that with what Demos said, and you kind of get this overarching restoration of not only the rule of like canon law in the church, but the rule of the natural law in our theology. A restoration of essentially Catholic theology in this getting rid of this new Bergoglian theology. Notice no mention of synodality. I would suggest also that the next pope immediately just say, no, we're not doing this anymore. This is stupid. We're not doing this anymore. This isn't the Catholic Church. This is something else, and be done with it. Raven Ray says, "Well, I'm late. Overslept my afternoon nap after house cleaning." Well, it happens. But yes, this is what we're talking about, is you have the corruption scandal is the thing that looms over this, as does Catholic Charities, USAID, and the allegation that the Vatican gets like 65-80% of its funding from essentially the US government through its nonprofit organizations, and from a couple other European governments through nonprofit organizations. And then when you understand how money gets dealt with when it goes from one nonprofit to the next, you begin to see how this works, and also why nonprofits rarely do much to help the people they claim they're helping. That's going to loom large over this too, assuming we get a conclave this year. And while I'm not entirely convinced that's going to happen, I think I'm more convinced now than I was a month ago that it is, despite the fact that Francis is now making travel plans, despite the fact that Francis has got events. He's going to host the King and Queen of England soon. Yeah, okay. We shall see. I'm curious, though, what do you think about all this in the comments? Let me know, because I find it absolutely remarkable that we have figures right now in Rome who are pushing back against things at great risk. I suspect Demos II is either Mueller or Seurat, or Monsignor Books, likely one of those three. And I could be wrong. I could very much be wrong, but I do suspect it's one of them, and they take great risk. It's worth noting Cardinal Robert Seurat on June 15th, 2025, will be too old to participate in the conclave. And when that happens, there's an allegation that Francis is hanging on basically until then. That seems to me a little much, because it's such for the modernists to do. Plus, I don't know if you can artificially keep somebody around that long, but it is what it is. That's the allegation. But Cardinal Seurat does loom over this, because apparently he's like the favorite among the better cardinals, although I don't think he has much of a chance. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe hit like, subscribe if you haven't. Does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.